Well, thank you for joining us here today at this business hour. Cybersecurity and employee benefit plans, are you at risk? I'm Dale Vlasic. I'm the chair of the Employee Benefits Practice Group here at McDonald Hopkins, and joining me on the panel today are two of my partners and colleagues. To my immediate right is Chris Sierpinski, who is a member in our Detroit office. She's part of the firm's National Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice Group, and she's the one with all the knowledge. John and I are going to pretend, and further to my right is John Wirtschafter. He's part of our Employee Benefits Practice Group, and he's here in the Cleveland area. And so the three of us, mostly those two, are going to be talking about this issue. You know, I don't have to tell anybody about data privacy and hacking and cybersecurity and all the rest of that stuff. I was going to say, well, you can't pick up a newspaper, but that's just dating myself. You can't read anything about anything these days without some news article or something about kind of hacking or data security breaches or some other credit card being compromised. But this particular topic, because obviously this has been around for a while, but this particular topic dealing with employee benefit plans had its genesis. I mean, I don't have to tell you, employee benefit plans are very electronic these days. I think every one of us, if you're in a 401k plan, you have all this information, you've got it stored online, you've got things available to you, and people are getting into them. And the genesis of this came a little earlier this year when, out of the clear blue, there were like 3 incidents involving either referral sources of ours or, in one particular situation, a client of ours, which John may be mentioning, not by name, but mentioning in terms of dealing with this. And I said, this is something we need to talk about. So I'm glad you're here with us today. We're going to be happy to answer questions from the audience during this program. For those of you who are here in Cleveland, you can simply write your question on one of the cards you were given and just hold it up, and somebody from the McDonald Hopkins staff will deliver it to us. For our participants who are watching live on our webcast, you're welcome to submit your questions by clicking on the question link on your screen. If you submitted questions in advance, and there were a couple, we've tried to work those into the program today. So with that background and my brief introduction, I'm going to ask Chris to give us just kind of a generic overview of the problem without using the newspaper. So go ahead.
Sure, and thanks so much for putting together this program, and thanks for attending, everybody here. So I thought what we would start with is sort of the general state of cybersecurity. And I've been in this space for about 14 years, and I don't really anymore have to talk about data privacy and cybersecurity 101 the way that I used to back then. Because, as Dale mentioned, you can't go online and read an article anymore without coming across something relating to cybersecurity. So, we deal with, in the data privacy and cybersecurity group, we deal with these issues every day, all day, every day. And we have done a number of incidents over the last decade or so that the practice has been active. And so what we tend to see, and what we see on a daily basis, fall into some sort of general categories of what are, how is data lost? How is data compromised? So one of those ways is through a lost device. So we've all been at the airport when there's been an announcement over the loudspeaker, please come back to security, so-and-so, you left your laptop here, please come back and get your laptop. So that was really, lost laptop, lost thumb drive, that kind of information, information that's stored on those devices can be compromised when those devices are lost. We talk a lot about encryption. And so if those devices are encrypted, that's a safe harbor generally, but can be a good protection. But that's one area of risk. We talk a lot about the technical side of things, sophisticated hackers getting into systems and being able to do a lot. But we also don't want to ignore the reality of paper. So we still have paper documents that are reviewed at our offices that have to get disposed of, that sometimes are taken home to be worked on. And that is another category and area of risk. These hard copy documents. I had a matter when I worked at the Illinois Attorney General's office at the outset of my career, where somebody left a stack of documents in their locker at the gym. So they had taken stuff home to work on them, but stopped at the gym on their way home, and everything was left in a locker. So there are some paper documents that you really need to be concerned about as well. And also just documents being thrown away in a dumpster out back without being properly shredded or otherwise rendered unreadable. One of the major areas of risk that we see daily, and this is a huge issue right now, is vendors. So all of this is service providers that you employ that do all kinds of services for you. Everyone knows sort of the infamous Target situation, that it was really an HVAC vendor that had the vulnerability that led to the large data breach at Target. But I mean, vendors can be your best friend and your worst enemy in that way, that that you do have an obligation to be paying attention to what are these vendors doing, what kinds of provisions do they have in place, and security do they have in place to protect your data. We also have situations of rogue employees, disgruntled ex-employees, malicious users internal to companies who sort of see, for whatever reason, they have an ability to access data and maybe can sell it to earn a little bit more money, or get into other scenarios where they feel like they have to access and sell data. And then, sort of the last category, large category, is the more sophisticated database or server hacking. So when somebody actually infiltrates a system and is able to get in and see what data you have. So those are sort of the general cybersecurity issues. And I think for this group and in this industry, any or all of those are a reality. There's not one area that you can say, well, we're safe from that particular category. So as we see it, the threat for data loss can really be coming from well-meaning but negligent employees, or disgruntled ex-employees, or your vendors or other service providers. And then also from that unknown set, the cyber criminals that are out there that are hoping to make a buck. Why do we care? Why are we talking about this? Why is this an issue? And I think, one of the major issues is that data breaches and cybersecurity incidents they cost real harm. I mean, it costs real dollars to actually remediate these issues, to respond to these issues. So those costs can come in the form of responding if it is in fact a quote-unquote data breach, as the state data breach notification laws define, that you have to report to regulators, to impacted individuals. So those costs are significant. You have to notify individuals. Generally, it starts with a forensic investigation of your system, unless it's a more unsophisticated kind of incident like a lost laptop. Often there's a forensic component. There's the legal analysis. Sometimes you have to pay for credit monitoring for impacted people. You have to pay for the mailing, and maybe you have a service provider do the mailing for you and a call center. Those are all real costs. The Ponemon Institute has done an analysis of the costs of data breaches over the last 15 years or so. And the cost right now is about $150 per record. So if you think about having 1,000 customers or 10,000 people in your database for whom you have information on, those numbers can add up pretty quickly. Some of the other potential costs can relate to regulatory costs. So that's another area. Why do we care about this? Well, we care because there are laws in place that require notification in the event that you had a reportable breach. And if you fail to do that, then you can be held accountable by the regulators. The state attorneys general and the Federal Trade Commission generally are the entities that are looking into this. But as we all know, the other regulators, I mean, there's a host of alphabet soup out there, and they're all issuing regulations, they're all issuing guidance, they're all talking about this issue, saying that the entities and the companies and the businesses that they regulate really need to be taking better care of the data. And so as those regulatory schemes progress and get more complex and more robust, that's another reason why we care, and another area where it could cost real dollars to respond to these incidents, because you do have to deal with regulator inquiries. You may face fines or penalties for not abiding by the regulations. You might have to implement new policies and procedures as a result of an investigation, or submit to audits. And so those are all real potential consequences of this area. There's also something that's a little harder to quantify and talk through is a reputational loss or lost business. There's often some polling that happens after large data breaches where people say, oh, it doesn't really impact my, I'm still going to shop at that store, I'm still going to do business with that company. But what we are seeing more and more is that your business clients for whom you might be working with might say, if you as my, providing this service, I have customers downstream that I need to protect. If you as the service provider to me are not going to protect that information, I'm going to go to a service provider that will. So in a business-to-business context, we are seeing that there is more potential for that reputational harm and the actual lost business. And then I just wanted to make a point before we sort of focus in on, why this is pertinent in this particular space, is just on what are some of the trends that we're seeing at the moment. And I think the biggest one is ransomware. I don't even know how many ransomware matters at the moment. Any business that thinks that they are immune from ransomware is lying to themselves. Anybody who has data that is stored somewhere can have that data ransomed, can have it encrypted and locked down, and have somebody demand payment in order to allow them to have access again to that data. From the very, very small shops to the very, very large companies. We see it in state government, municipal government, CPA firms, law firms, you name it. I mean, it's rampant all over the place. And so that is a specific area that we are addressing at the moment as well that can be super scary. So that's sort of a lay of the land on the general state of cybersecurity and what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis in the practice.
Great. Well, with that overview, employee plans are obviously a subset of all that information, whether these are plans you're sponsoring yourselves or you're a service provider dealing with plans. We have issues. And John, why is all this information especially pertinent to employee plans and the companies and organizations that provide them and deal with them?
Well, Dale, excuse me. For those of you who are listening to this on the radio, I am not Demi Moore. I am suffering from a little bit of an issue. In fact, just out of curiosity, how many of you in the audience here have had medical training?
Uh-oh.
Well, okay. No, I'll be fine, but I apologize for that. So the question is, why do employee benefit plans, why are we here? And the reason for that is employee benefit plans are a very attractive target for these types of crimes. You think about it, first of all, at last glance, there were $30 trillion in retirement plans in the United States. $30 trillion, that will pay for a lot of things. So yeah, you just get a couple of those plans and you're going to be fine. 30 trillion, that's just remarkable. And as both Dale and Chris had mentioned, a ton of information is kept electronically for employee benefit plans. If you think about all the different stuff we have for our employees and for our benefits and all the things, the payroll, all the things that touches, it touches so many people in an organization. Sure, it touches the benefit administration staff, but it touches finance, it touches payroll, it touches the whole human resources group, it touches treasury, audit. All these people are having access to some piece of that pie. And so you have a lot of information moving back and forth electronically, both internally and externally with vendors. You have plan administrators, you have investment advisors, you have all sorts of other groups, actuaries, and and so forth that are pulling information back and forth and that are trading it. And then lastly, you have participants, and they're talking with everyone. They're talking with the vendors, they're talking with the administrators, they're talking with the company, they're talking with payroll. And so you have a lot of information that is just shooting back and forth electronically that, you know, it's juicy information. It's either protected because it's personally identifiable information, PII, which means things like name, social security number, address, telephone numbers, things of that nature, credit cards. All of that is, you know, protected, supposed to be protected. Or even potentially worse, it's protected health information. It's stuff about their, you know, physical well-being and so forth. Things that I may have shared with you unintentionally. But no, but that they want to keep private, and they have every right to keep private. And not only that, but the company is restricted from knowing that stuff when it's considering, you know, promotions, pay, and things like that. So it's very, very important that that's you know, protected, and that it's also a treasure trove for cyber criminals. So the other thing you have to think about, though, is that, I mean, not every company is the size of a Fortune 500 company that can throw the resources into protecting this kind of data. Most employee benefit plans are sponsored and administered by a company that's, you know, under probably 100 employees, under 50 employees. And so you don't have the sophisticated ability and the resources to go ahead and protect that. But each one of these companies do have a responsibility. ERISA, you know, all these plans are subject to ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, as amended. And ERISA places a burden on people that are called fiduciaries. Fiduciaries are anyone, like the plan administrator, anyone that touches the plan's assets or has discretion to make decisions on behalf of the plan, or is otherwise, in some case or another, administering the dollars or the decisions of the plan. And ERISA places a very high burden on them to make sure that they do a couple things. One is that they administer the plan for the exclusive benefit of plan participants and beneficiaries. Well, exclusive benefit, that's tough. And that they do so with the skill, care, prudence, and diligence of a prudent person. That's a very high standard. And the Department of Labor, no one here is from the Department of Labor by any chance, are they? A very reasonable group of people that I get along with quite well, I'll have you know. Lovely, lovely people. But they're in charge of administering the ERISA fiduciary rules. And they've thought about cyber criminals and cybercrime and all these data privacy issues, you know, for quite a while. In fact, in 2011, they had an ERISA advisory council that came out with a set of you know, studied this issue and came out with a series of suggestions and so forth. And they reconfigured that group in 2016, although it's always wrong, but they looked at the problem again in 2016 and came out with another report. But the fact is that the Department of Labor says that if you're going to store stuff, your employee benefit stuff, on electronics means, and you're going to use electronic means to communicate with your participants or to handle things, then you have a responsibility to ensure that the information on that remains private. And that places a high burden on companies to make sure that if they're going to use the internet, or if they're going to use their computers to gather all this kind of stuff, that they have to take the efforts to protect that. And if they don't, it's at their own risk.
Well, John, you know, kind of amazing the Department of Labor started looking at this back in 2011. They can't get electronic notice information out to folks, but they're worried about protecting electronic information. I apologize, that's a bit of an in-joke for the ERISA folks.
Yeah.
But, so they've come up with some recommendations. Are they practical? What are they? Are they
well,
we can implement?
You know, the thing about it is that the recommendations really work on a scale, in the sense that they can't expect the 3-person doctor's office to provide the same level of protection as the 3,000 person manufacturer. They just can't. So there is some sensibility to understanding that you have to work with your resources. If it costs, $5 million to implement a true plan that, for protecting all this, they're not going to expect the small little profit sharing plan to be able to do that. So there is some judgment as to, what you need to do, but there are minimum requirements. But I think the one thing, and first of all, I would recommend everyone read the Advisory Council's report if they are interested in that. It's called Cybersecurity Considerations for Benefit Plans. It was issued in November of 2016. And while it doesn't give a lot of answers, it just sort of, I think, really sets up the discussion and the thoughts. And all that is just the ERISA Advisory Council's thoughts about how to approach this situation. But nonetheless, if you think of it that way, what I read the basic, premise of what they're saying is that, one, you need to set up a plan with policies and procedures of how you're going to deal with all the data and how you're going to deal with all these protections. The better you do at that, the better that you eliminate people having access to it that aren't in that plan and set up encryption and other things like that, the better. And then the next thing is you got to set up a plan for what you're going to do when an event occurs. Because if you wait till an event occurs to make those kinds of decisions, you're way behind the game. So I think that this is thinking of it as a fiduciary, thinking of it from that capacity. I think it's like so many other things. It's think through the problems, come up with a plan, put it down in writing, and follow through with it. And it's that will provide a lot of protection.
Well, I mean, that's kind of sobering. Chris had talked about all the outside regulations you have to deal with, and now, John, you're telling us this also could be a breach of fiduciary duty if we don't do this right. So
that's
you can't win with this.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, Chris, you help companies all the time. You mentioned this is what you do. This is you get up every morning, you take care of your kids, and then worry about all this stuff. Can you tell us what kind of planning and policies should a plan sponsor, whether they be a 5-person doctor group or a 5,000 people manufacturing operation? What kinds of things should they be thinking about?
Sure. Well, I think I think there's a unique. We're sort of talking about 2 buckets, right? A plan sponsor as a plan sponsor, and then a plan sponsor as just a business that's running a business that has data on it. So with respect to policies and procedures that plan sponsors and really all businesses should think about with respect to the data that they maintain is first and foremost conducting, and to John's point, these solutions are meant to be scalable. So I think with respect to the Department of Labor guidance and guidance that we get from other regulators and other government agencies, is that there is not an expectation that there's a one-size-fits-all approach. I think there is a sensitivity and an understanding that there are very, very small companies and very, very large companies and everything in between, and that not everybody has unlimited funds to spend on cybersecurity and information security. And so, some of these things, you may think about and look at and think this is not a realistic kind of expenditure for us, but something that could be considered. So one of the things that we recommend is really just getting a handle on the data that you have, the data that flows into the company, who has access to it, where it sits, how it's protected, that kind of thing. That can be a very substantial undertaking, or it can be more of just a conversation with the 2 people in the doctor's office who, the 2 doctors that have the practice together. What kind of solutions do we have out there? What kind of databases do we have? Where does this information sit? And then if possible, doing some kind of penetration testing or some kind of cybersecurity testing of your systems. We understand that a lot of people rely on sort of outsourced IT managed service providers and other vendors. And so, working with them to understand where is our data, how does it sit, how is it protected, where are some vulnerabilities that we need to assist with and to patch. One of the kinds of policies that we recommend is some kind of a written information security program, a written information security plan. This is required under Massachusetts law for businesses that interact with data relating to Massachusetts residents. It's starting to become more widespread. It's the kind of program that, for example, if you do get in trouble with the FTC and you have to enter into a consent decree, they often will make you, force you to put together some kind of written information security plan that you then have to implement and maintain. So this can talk through, again, a lot of that work that you've already done on the front end with respect to where's my data, who has access to it, and puts down in writing, how are we going to protect this information? How do we classify it? Do we have a subset of information that's protected? So we have PHI, we have PII, we have proprietary company data that needs to be protected. And here's how we're going to protect it on sort of a general level. And identifying a team, identifying people that can assist with managing that data and who are the go-to people if there's an issue. Confidentiality agreements for employees, for vendors, for visitors, just sort of keeping that kind of tight. Ongoing training of employees. So once you establish a written information security program, you have policies in place relating to password management, for example. What are your passwords going to look like? What is IT going to require of you? How complex do they need to be? How often are they supposed to be changed? If you're away from your computer for longer than 10 minutes, does it lock down? So you have to use a password to get back in. All of those kinds of things. Once those are set down in paper, then you need to train your employees. You need to talk to your employees about, here's what our requirements are. Here are the consequences for violating these requirements. One of the areas is exactly what I talked about with respect to that stack of paper that was left at the gym locker. Well, you're not actually supposed to take this stack of paper out of our business. Like, you're not supposed to take it home with you. And if you do that, there's consequences. We understand you want to work remotely, you want to work from home. There's got to be a different way. You have to do it securely through our VPN. You can't do it by taking paper with you out of our premises. And so properly training employees on those policies, what the consequences are for violating.
So Chris, a lot of the employee benefit plans deal with vendors, okay, that are either administering the plan and therefore have all the information or are dealing with certain facets of the plan and have access to that information. Now, if it's a very large company, they may actually go out and audit those vendors to make sure that that they're properly storing and privacy and handling the privacy issues. What do small companies do? I mean, what should they be doing with their vendors?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. So if you can't do sort of a large scale or even a small scale audit of the policies that your vendor has in place, one of the ways to protect yourself is with the contract, is negotiating the contract with the vendor to really spell out and talk through whose responsibility is it to do what when. So if the vendor, because there are the state data breach notification laws that require notification to impacted individuals and regulators as a result of a breach. They have this differentiation, most of them do, between a data owner, the business that does the direct interaction with an individual, the employer, and a service provider, somebody that just maintains data, a vendor, a service provider, and sort of differentiates their obligations with respect to who notifies whom. So a vendor is technically supposed to notify the data owner, the employer, and then the employer then notifies impacted individuals. Well, that relationship on paper is very simple. In reality, it's very complex. And so it's really a good idea to, within the contract, spell out whose responsibility is it to do what, and to really have the vendor self-report to you what their data security policies look like. how are they protecting your data? If you have established within your company a written information security program and other data protection policies, maybe what you do is say, you have to protect the data that we provide to you and that you're assisting us with. You have to protect that to the same level that we protect it. So you have to abide by our policy, even if they don't have one internally.
Yeah.
Now, if you are talking to a vendor and they don't have any kind of data protection policy, then I would say try to find a different vendor. But we understand the reality is that there's a lot of companies that are kind of slow to this game, so they don't yet have sort of robust policies. But at least talking through the issue. One of the things that we hear all the time in the cybersecurity world is suffering from a breach is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so if you have this situation where a vendor is saying, don't worry about it, we don't need to talk about that, we're not going to lose data, we have all these great security features over here, don't worry. Well, all it takes is one person to respond to a phishing email, give up their credentials, which happens all the time. Every day, all day long, people are giving up their credentials and thinking that it was a legitimate request. And so all it takes is for one person to do that, and all this great security you have is not going to work because the threat actor has the credentials, so they can legitimately get in because they have the right passwords. So I think that is one of the major issues with respect to vendors.
Yeah, we're asked to look at those types of vendor agreements all the time, and of course we'll try to get someone from our data privacy involved. But obviously you're looking for them to, one, take responsibility for it. You're also looking for them to report any incidences immediately.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to, any kind of softness about that. We want it immediately. And then lastly, you're looking for some kind of insurance that
Yes.
protects them and us in the event that there is an incident, because these are very costly things to not only fix, but then thereafter to
Right.
to deal with. So those are the kinds of things that we look at from a vendor agreement standpoint.
And I did want to mention one of the policies and procedures that we haven't really talked about, but John sort of mentioned, is an incident response plan. So it can be a major help when something does happen. You have an incident, IT reports to you, somebody lost a laptop, or somebody gave up their credentials in a phishing email, whatever the situation is, you have this incident response plan in place that spells out what's your incident response team, who's on it, somebody from HR, somebody from legal, somebody from the CFO's office, somebody else from the C-suite maybe. And then, depending on the nature, maybe it's just one person, the nature of the business. So who is on the team? Who is making decisions about what happened and what's next? How are incidents classified? We always talk to our clients when we first get on a call and they say, here's what happened. We had a breach. And we say, okay, back up. Let's not use the B word. The B word's a bad word in our world. The B word is breach, and it triggers all kinds of reporting obligations. It's a defined term in the state data breach notification laws, in HIPAA, in all of these regulatory schemes. So we haven't had a breach. We've had an incident that we are investigating, and once we get to a breach, the clock starts ticking, and we have stuff to take care of. So how do you do that? How do you classify, this is an incident, now we have reached the level that this is a breach, and now we've got to deal with that. How to analyze the data. At what point do you notify other people? At what point do you notify law enforcement? At what point do you notify your customers, even if it's not a reportable data breach, but for a business reason, this is something that might be impacting. This is happening in the ransomware world all the time at the moment because companies are shut down. They're not able to process work on behalf of their customers. Their customers are coming to the website, they can't do anything, they're trying to place an order, they can't do it. So what's that message look like? And so, maybe you have somebody from communications on this incident response team. But this incident response plan, as John said, if you wait until you get that call from IT that says somebody's lost a laptop that was unencrypted and we think it had protected health information on it, then you're way behind the ball at that point, and it's going to be very tough because it's a lot of running around trying to figure out who's in charge and what do we do next. If you are able to, ahead of time, do a little bit of planning, at least set forth a team that can convene and start talking through these issues, and then get legal on the phone, and we can walk you through the rest. That's a great policy to put in place.
Well, Chris, this may be an unfair question. Kind of
My
one
favorite.
of the incidents. Okay. Well, I alluded to a couple of incidents that happened earlier that some of our referral sources and a client was involved with. It was, on plan, 401k plan, online access. We all got that. Someone logged on, had enough information, credentials of the participant to go on and request an in-service distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Plan processed it, check went out, the employee, the participant who should have gotten the money never got it because it went someplace else and didn't know about it till he got his 1099 and went and talked to somebody. Is there things we can do to protect against those kinds of incidents? I mean, it's kind of happening outside.
Right, so that's
Now, other than common
definitely,
sense, like walking down and say, Dave, did you really want to take $50,000 out of your plan?
right.
They didn't do that. In
Yeah,
any of those cases.
and that shouldn't, that step shouldn't be discounted, because really, what we're talking about in the cybersecurity world is protecting the data that you have. But in that scenario, that person's data was accessed through some other source. It wasn't it wasn't the plan sponsor, it wasn't the employer. It may have been, one of the thousands of breaches that we read about in the paper or online.
Right.
Who knows what the source of the data was, but somebody through that source and several others on, maybe a criminal website on the black market was able to buy, this person's name, social security number, and other pertinent information so that they could very well appear to be that person electronically to request this distribution or withdrawal. And so, I think some of those common sense, you've got to look at, there are just some situations where you're not going to catch it because the criminals are just that good. They have so much data, they're able to buy a complete dossier on that person so that they have so much of the information. And this is probably why something like signature, electronic signature, digital signature has now become an element of personal information in some of the state data breach notification laws, such that if it gets lost as a result of an incident, it's personal information that triggers notification. It's a breach. And my thought with that was, well, you sign checks, people sign stuff all the time. It's kind of out there. But if I, as a criminal, have found a name and a social security number and a mailing address and some other information, and then I get a hold of a signature, a digital signature. Well, if that goes through, I mean, as a plan sponsor, that's going to be very difficult to identify. And so really, this, walking down, knowing the employees, walking down the hall and saying, well, this is weird. It's the same thing with phishing. We had a spoofed. And I think all of our offices have gotten them.
Right.
These spoofed emails, and probably some of you have gotten these as well, saying, can you, from the CEO or some head person in the company saying, can you do me a favor, can you run out and get 100 iTunes gift cards? Well, you get that and you're like, what? That's weird. But people will do it. They will do it immediately because they think, I got this email from. And so the same thing, if your spidey sense goes off, if a red flag goes up and you think this is a very strange request, then follow through on that and walk down the hall if you can. I don't know if you have other-
I've been using that as an excuse not to follow any of Sean's.
But John, I don't know if you have any other advice, but I mean,
Sure.
really it's just...
No, I think it's, basically good common sense. But, for instance, if electronically someone's going to change or call up, we had an incident where someone called up the plan administrator, pretended to be the employee, had enough information to convince the administrator that they were the employee, and then requested a change in their email address and their mailing address, and signed off. And of course, they did not then send a notice to the old one saying, we've received a request to change your email address to the following if this is not you. I mean, we all get those from time to time. That's a good practice, Send those out, because if they had done that, it would have gone to the old email address, and maybe that they wouldn't have had an incident. But these types of problems are happening with plans all over the place. It may be distributions, and it may be loans. A lot of people taking loans out that aren't actually the participant that's allowed to take the loan out. And so all of those are ERISA violations and breaches of your plan, and therefore someone's going to have to put that money back into the plan. It's not going to be the participant that didn't receive the loan.
These things can be expensive. I mean, not only in terms of the remediation and everything else, but in terms of the participants, the incidents we're talking about. In one instance, they had requested a distribution of $50,000. That's, I think that's a significant amount of money. And if they did it to a couple people, it starts to add up. So to John's point, who's going to pay for this? I mean, a lot of the vendor contracts, John mentioned, and we talked, a lot of third-party administrators and so forth, who are the ones whose maybe their website that your 401k plan is sitting on, a lot of them have a limitation of damages clauses built into them. They'll say, look, if we breached our duty to you, then they were all worried, not so much cybersecurity, but they were worried about screwing up your testing or doing something like that. And they say, well, our limitation is, well, you only get back what you paid us over the years that you were here. There's no consequential damage, there's no anything else. First of all, I don't know whether that works in cybersecurity, but is there insurance? What can we do?
Well, I mean, first of all, employee benefit plans and companies that administer them have a number of different insurance policies in place. For the plan, every ERISA qualified plan has to have a Fidelity Bond. And that's a bond that would step in if there was theft and reimburse the plan for the theft up to a limit. That's not going to help you too much for a cyber crime, because you might get the money, but then they're going to go after the company who's responsible anyway. So it's not insurance, it's a bond. So let's not rely on that to save this problem. A lot of our companies, or a lot of our clients use Fiduciary Insurance, which is something we all like. Fiduciary Insurance is just that. It provides coverage to those who are acting in a fiduciary capacity for the company, and it's, it might be the plan administrator, it might be the trustee or whatever of these types of plans. And that might provide some help to a company that gets hit with one of these cyber crimes. The problem with the fiduciary insurance is it's generally third-person oriented. In other words, there has to be a lawsuit or a claim made by a third person against the company before they'll even step in. And then they're going to necessarily pay back the money potentially, but they're not going to pay for all the work that's going to be required to not only fix the problem, but to do all the other requirements that are imposed by the state and by the Department of Labor. So again, that's probably not enough coverage, and I'll leave it to all of our insurance experts out here, and I can see quite a few of them. But to answer better whether that's enough, but I don't think so. I think we got to do more than that, and that's where I think we get to you, Chris.
Right, and I think what we see all the time is special cybersecurity policies, and so these, like I said back when I first started doing this work, a cybersecurity policy was few and far between. We did not see very many of them. They are very common now, and they offer a range of protection. And so some of them, very inexpensive, but offer, a pretty low limit in terms of what they'll protect. But they will pay for things like a forensic investigation, a forensics analyst or specialist to come in, do some assessment of what happened, identify the vulnerability for you, and say, here's where we see the person got in. It was a remote desktop protocol brute force attack, and so if you're continuing to use that, maybe you want to switch to a VPN or something. They can offer some.
That doesn't sound good.
No.
I don't know what it is, but it doesn't sound. You don't want that to happen.
They'll pay for that. They'll pay for legal services and notification costs. The call center and the mailing vendor that I talked about at the outset. And so these specialized cybersecurity policies really are what companies are starting to rely on for these types of incidents, because the other policies that are out there, errors and omissions and D&O, all of those, potentially have exclusions for this type of incident. And so there's potentially some kind of limitation that's not going to get you what you need. So really, the specialized cybersecurity policies are important. And like I said, I think with respect to those policies, back when they first came out, there may have been sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. But it's not. It shouldn't be like that anymore, and it's not from what we see and our experience with the clients that we have. That there are pools for municipalities and other small agencies that want to pool together resources, and we see that with respect to school districts and some medical offices and dental offices and other small companies.
Yeah, we require that of any vendor that we bargain with, that they have a separate policy for cybersecurity, because that's the kind of policy that's going to give them the resources to be able to step right in and immediately deal with the issue, rather than having to wait till there's literally a claim and you filed and this and that before you have any kind of resource available to help you battle.
Now these cybersecurity, a lot of insurance, when they're dealing with the plan world, tend to carve out plans, especially fiduciary issues. Have you seen them in cyber policies that you're aware of carving out plans from being covered? Like D&O a lot of times will carve out from fiduciary issues.
I'm not aware of that, but
I'm just
I
mentioning
defer.
Something to look for. Yeah.
I think it's certainly, as with any policy, it's important to, the devil's in the details, right? So it is important to really understand what it is that you're paying for and what you're signing up for. But in our experience, we haven't seen too many carve-outs. There are differences between how, first party versus potentially third party claims are covered. So if we have, a security incident, let's say a ransomware attack. So you have cybersecurity insurance, you make a claim against that insurance and say, we're shut down, we need help. So they call us, we call a forensic firm, we all get on the phone, we start talking through the issue. The forensic firm works hopefully through the issue, hopefully you have viable backups so you don't have to pay the ransomers. You get your data back, everything gets restored, the forensic goes forward and does their analysis, we do our legal analysis. All of that is covered by these cyber insurance policies. Then at the end of the day, say notification went out, you sent notification to 5,000 people, maybe some of those start to get together in a class action and they say, oh, you should have protected our information, we understand what happened. And these things do happen, but we think that there was, you knew about this 6 months ago and you didn't do anything, whatever the claim is. So they file a class action lawsuit against you. Now it's separate coverage, right? So that's not breach response. It's not, this cybersecurity protection. It's defending a lawsuit. It's a litigation coverage. So there are different sublimits. There's different retentions possibly for those different claims. So that is an issue, but I haven't seen too much in terms of carve-outs. We're seeing a lot of managed service providers, so IT providers that have gotten hit in the last couple of months. There's some vulnerabilities out there with some of the software and the hardware that are kind of commonplace with IT vendors. And we are seeing that they're getting hit and then it's spreading to all of their customers. And so we have a series of, for example, dental offices that have been ransomed. Their files have been encrypted because of the service provider that they were using, kind of spread out like that. And so what we're starting to see is that some of the claims that are coming back for the sort of downstream companies that have had some business interruption or other losses, that there is some wrangling back and forth about what the insurance policy will cover in a cybersecurity claim. Again, because we're talking about sort of third-party peripheral issues relating to, well, I'm a customer of this business that had a cybersecurity event, and I was unable to do business for 5 days while my system was locked down. And so what can I be reimbursed for? Yeah,
and if you get to the point where you're arguing about that kind of stuff, it's too late. You've already had a lot of problems, and now it's just a question who pays for it. So this whole area has just been growing and growing. I read somewhere that the number of incidents from 2015 to 2017 doubled. And I'm guessing that they've doubled again since 2017 to 2019. The level of sophistication of the criminals is just remarkable. It's no longer the son-in-law of the Iranian oil minister. You know, none of us are falling for that anymore, right? Not again. But, no, they're very sophisticated. I mean, literally, I got an email from our CEO the other day asking me to come, send him up something, this file, and it was like, that doesn't sound right. I called him. I said, did you send me an email? He said, no. I said, didn't think so. So it's becoming more and more sophisticated, and I really think that the true goal would be to try and stop these incidents from happening. And as Chris said, it's not going to happen. But what would you recommend a company should be doing now to assess, to look at their systems to see whether there's weaknesses? Are there tests that they can do? Are there things that they can do to help identify areas of weaknesses and stop these types of things from happening before they actually happen?
Yeah, so there I did mention penetration testing, and there are other cybersecurity tests that can be done on systems.
And are these done internally, or are they done by service?
Usually they're done by a third-party service provider. I think there's a lot that internal IT, if you do have, if the company's big enough to have, a couple of information technology folks internal, there's a lot that they can do. And some of it is this more common sense stuff, like I talked about with respect to that password policy. So it also relates to, the software that gets developed or that gets downloaded and used internally. Is there a password to access it, and is it the standard password? Because if it still says password, then you're not being protected. So little things like that can really help significantly. So, some of the cybersecurity, tips with respect to, some of them are sort of less technical like that. Others are, implementing something like multi-factor authentication, requiring somebody to, sort of two passwords rather than just, your username and password, because that can get compromised very easily. So having another, something on your mobile device, a special code or some way that you're authenticating that is really you that's trying to get in. Those are not foolproof. We do have a situation where an employee got pinged 4 times by the multi-factor authentication tool, saying she was sitting at her desk, at her computer, which was on, and she was working, saying, it looks like you're trying to access the system remotely. Is it really you? And she said, no. Yes, on the 5th try. So somebody got in because she just thought, well, that's weird. Somebody's really trying to get in, even though I'm already in and it's not me. So it happened, not foolproof, but that kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of human error in this.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. I mean,
with respect to the ransomware, there's some thought to be put into data backups. Where is your backup? How is it protected? And these are good questions. If you do have an IT service provider, there's no dumb question. Just ask, where's my backup? Where's all my data sitting? Is it on the cloud? What does that mean? How is it protected? Is it segmented from other data? So let's say I get hit with ransomware, is it gonna infect my, day-to-day system, and is it gonna infect my backup? Because if that happens, our clients are often left with the only option, which is to deal with the criminals and pay the ransom, which is not advisable and not something that law enforcement wants you to do, but sometimes you're sort of stuck. So those kinds of questions and then reviewing vendor contracts, as we talked about. I think that can go a long way. Really talk to your vendors. Again, no question is a stupid question. It's your data, it's your risk. So what are you doing to protect it? Whose responsibility is it to talk about, to file a claim, to report it to the regulators, to tell the individuals about it? Let's talk through some of these issues, and really just to have an awareness about that these are issues that really everybody needs to be addressing.
Well, we're kind of talking at the employer level. John or Chris, I mean, are there things we should be telling our participants, our employees? Like change your password, John, please. For your access to your 401k.
And I think the same. You can have phishing, for example, is something that we tell people to train their employees on all the time. Just constantly bombard them with phishing messages so that they just understand that if they get an email that looks fishy in any way, that looks funny, they need to send it to IT, delete it, don't respond, don't click on a link, don't open the attachment. And so I feel like you can have those same kind of trainings for your participants, and do the same thing. Talk to them about, they have their own personal responsibility to protect their data as well. And so to try to, to let them know we're going to be addressing these things on a company level. We're doing the X, Y, and Z to protect, and then you have your own part. So an employee has a responsibility to protect company data, but they also have their responsibility to protect their own data.
Yeah. Well, you've got some people, and we all know them, that are on the website, every half hour looking at their 401k plan and all of that. And other people have never looked on it, ever. Have no idea that it exists. Should we be pushing them, John, you think, to, get in there, take a look? Did you really take $50,000 out?
There may be a fiduciary reason why you want your employees to be aware of what's going on, and certainly a PR reason why a company would want their employees to recognize, look, all the good things we've done for you, look how much you've accrued, look what your benefits up to. But no, you're not gonna retrain people to,
go on
be
if they don't want to
interested
go
in
on.
that.
Right.
Yeah, we had a former managing partner who I used to tease that his laptop computer was just a coaster because I never saw it open. But the answer is you're not going to change people. But I do agree that we can give information to our participants to help them. We do that already. We give them financial information about investing. It's not just for investing in their 401k plan. It's just their whole general life. We give them insurance information and things like that. Why shouldn't we give them other information about how to protect their personal information and their personal finances? So I think that while it's not a fiduciary responsibility, I think it's just being a good company.
I mean, a lot of employers, to your point, a lot of employers have annual meetings where they talk about, bring the investment people in and talk about the 401k. Could it be that the last item on the sheet that day?
I don't know about that. I mean,
Well,
we usually like to send them out, happy with
Right, don't scare them
come
right
back,
before they
not
leave.
be aware
Maybe
of the
fit it
boogeyman,
in the middle.
Fit it in the middle. So I'm not going to put any
that
money
would
in
be
there
my
because it may be gone. So,
recommendation.
Yeah, it is a fine point we have to walk. Yeah, I'm not going to put 401k dollars in because somebody's going to steal it. So, but I think we do have a duty to educate folks a little bit about it and to make some common sense and
Yeah, because several of the breaches that we've talked about, in hundreds of thousands of the breaches that have occurred, have resulted because of legitimate information that someone was able to get somewhere else and then take to the plan or take to the plan administrator or take somewhere else and use it for bad deeds. So the company ends up paying for that. So yeah, I guess it's just good business sense to get your employees a little bit more knowledgeable about how to protect their information.
And yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, one of the other statistics that I think the Poneman Institute and others that analyze these kinds of things say is that about 75% of breaches are preventable. I mean, they're very simple. It just seems like, we all, like I said at the outset, sort of think about the very sophisticated hacker who's doing all kinds of crazy things to get into your system. But the reality is really that there are very simple vulnerabilities that get exploited, and sometimes it's people, and sometimes it's hardware, but preventable.
And this, to Chris's point, it's not always Russian hackers trying to get in. Sometimes it's just dumb things. Situation. Client had engaged a company to do a dependent audit on their health plan. I think you've all been there. If you've got kids, at some point you'll get a letter from the health insurer or whoever's running the plan and say, yeah, so-and-so is listed as your dependent, just confirm that he/she is still in college or whatever, and all of that kind of stuff. So they engaged a company to do it. It wasn't very big. It was about 150 people. So they engaged them to do it, sent out a letter to all the employees saying, we show that, Mary Smith is your daughter, her address, her social security number, just confirm that she's still your dependent and she's still covered by the plan. They stuffed them in the wrong envelopes.
Oops.
It was just somebody wasn't paying attention. They were,
Multitasking.
or talking to somebody next door and put it. Now, it was a limited group. It just went to the employees of the company. And so as soon as they found out about it, they called and told people, just bring them back, don't open them, just bring them back. But people do dumb things, so it doesn't have to be all that sophisticated.
Yeah.
It wasn't malicious, it was just dumb.
Yeah, and not always easily solved like that
yeah.
one.
But that was easily solved. Now, when the client told me that, my first reaction was, oh my God, and I said that out loud, and I have a really good relationship with them. He said, it's never good when your lawyer says, oh my God.
We try not to say
Yeah,
that
right.
on our
Is that
hourly
like saying
call.
breach? Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Yes.
Well, I don't think we've left too much time for questions, but
We don't. We didn't get any. But we did promise to conclude at 1 o'clock, and we are essentially there. If you have additional questions here in Cleveland and you didn't want to bring them up in front of the group, we're going to be around for a while, so please feel free. We're happy to talk to you after the program. For those of you who are viewing the webcast, you can still submit your questions. We will continue to look at them, and we will try to get back to you with answers. As a group, whether it's the cybersecurity group or the EB group, we tend to follow the latest developments, and we try to post things and do blog posts and everything else on the issues or other issues. If you didn't get enough of this and you want to watch this again, you can watch a replay of this on the McDonald-Hopkins website at mcdonaldhopkins.com. We are going to send you a survey, and it really is from us. So, so if you would respond.
Don't give us
and
any of your personal information.
No personal information. Just your credit card number is good. But other than that, we're not going to ask for much. But just if you would respond to that, just to help us improve the programs and give you things that you're interested in. And with that, on behalf of the panel, thank you all for attending, whether it's live here in Cleveland or on the website.
thank you.
Thank you.